Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. So today's guest, I did a little stalking of. I was watching you for a while and finally got up the courage to reach out. Marisa Renee Lee is a called upon grief advocate, entrepreneur, and author of the book, Grief is Love. Deemed the friend we all wish we had in times of need by Elaine Welteroth. Marisa is able to utilize research-based advice and wisdom to help others navigate the complicated and dark emotions we face when experiencing loss, offering unique insights for women and Black communities. In addition to her work in the grief space, Lee is a former appointee in the Obama White House and CEO of Beacon Advisors, a mission-driven consulting firm primarily focused on racial equity. She is a rabble-rouser of social healing, former managing director of My Brother's Keepers Alliance, co-founder of the digital platform Supportal, and founder of the Pink Agenda, a national organization dedicated to raising money for breast cancer, care, research, and awareness. Lee also regularly contributes to Glamour, Vogue, MSNBC, and CNN as an expert for rituals well-being app. She is a Harvard graduate and avid home cook. Marisa lives in upstate New York with her husband, Matt, and their adorable little boy, Bennett, and their dog, Sadie. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such a generous introduction. I really appreciate it.
I could really, really use your help. If you haven't had a chance yet to listen to my season 5 opener, go back and listen to that. But in the event that you don't, I need your support. If you've been listening to me for a while, or even if you just started, you can go to Patreon and put in Dr. Amy Robbins. And there you can find different levels in which you can support the podcast financially. At this point, I have no ads. I have no sponsors. I am solely self-funding this podcast, and it would really, really help me out if you've gotten something out of this podcast. If you could donate $5, $10, or even $20 a month just to help me out, to help support the podcast. I'm continuing to work to try to get sponsors, to try to get advertisers, but until that happens, I need your help. And there are other ways to support the podcast. In addition to Patreon, you can like the podcast, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can rate and review the podcast. I always love reading your reviews. They're really heartwarming to me, and it's the emotional currency that I get from providing you with this resource. So please take a moment to just help me out here. You can also find the links in this episode, in the episode notes, as well as on my website at dramyrobbins.com. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. So this is a beautiful memoir of your grief journey. Tell us all about your mom, your relationship with her really untimely death, and what propelled you to write this story at this point in your life.
Thank you for that. So my mom actually first got sick when I was 13. One day she went from being working mom, PTA president, Sunday school teacher, all of those things, to being very physically sick, and eventually, became disabled. And it turned out, it took us years to figure out what exactly was wrong with her health, but she had multiple sclerosis. And unfortunately, by the time they found the disease, because it went untreated for so long, it had done permanent, irreparable damage to her brain. And so growing up, I was a caretaker and just, did everything I could to support my mom and my dad through a really difficult time, and also helped take care of my younger sister. And then as I was graduating from college, so fast forward, 9 years after my mom first gets sick, She's not feeling well again. No one seems to be able to figure out what's going on. Ultimately ends up seeing a family friend who's a doctor, and we learn that she has stage 4 breast cancer. And so in that moment, like I was there at the doctor's appointment with her, it was like the floor just opened up beneath my feet. You know, suddenly I knew that my mom was not just sick, but that she was dying and that she was going to die relatively soon. And so I took some time off after college to help mom and dad kind of manage that situation. And then I went to work on Wall Street. I started a breast cancer nonprofit because I needed to do something to feel like I was contributing to this disease that was ultimately going to kill my mom. And then at the very end of her life, you know, when we decided it no longer made sense for her to seek treatment, I spent almost all of my time with her, like helping to prepare her, helping to prepare myself, going through sort of the practical preparations around death and dying. And it was really hard, but I believed that because I was honest about what was happening and because I was so prepared, that was going to make it all easier when she actually did die. And of course, I was completely wrong. Like she died and it was like getting run over by a truck. And because I had prepared, I was very hard on myself the months following my mom's death. You know, I was like, there must be something wrong with me. Like, this is crazy. Like, why do I still feel so much pain? Eventually I decided, you know, I kind of just hit a wall and realized, you know what, there isn't anything wrong with me. Like where I think the problem actually sits is in how we talk about and treat grief and loss in our society. And so at this point, it was August of 2008. I wrote in my journal at the time, you know, I'm going to write a book about grief that's going to tell the truth about what grief really is and is not going to be sad and depressing. And it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. So far, I think I've checked 2 out of those 3 boxes. But the thing that finally pushed me to having to write the book was actually a pregnancy loss my husband and I experienced in 2019. We were at the end of, or at least what we thought was the end of our infertility, you know, IVF, egg donor, et cetera, challenges. And this was our final attempt at getting pregnant. We were 3 years in and we really believed that this was our baby and it was going to work out and it was going to be great. And then we were very briefly pregnant and not. And it was late 2019. And right after it happened, everyone found themselves grieving because we were all thrown into the global pandemic. And suddenly I was both like, you know, physically sick from the actual pregnancy loss, super depressed, riddled with anxiety, you know, unclear about the path forward to parenthood. And all I wanted was my mom. And there were no distractions to reach for during that time. And so I started writing. And one thing led to another. And an article that I wrote for Glamour in May of 2020 ended up going viral. And that led to Grief is Love, the book we're talking about today.
What do you think it was about the pregnancy loss that really pushed you into looking at your grief from your mom that had sort of laid dormant? I mean, it sounds like in the book you talk about like it was definitely there.
Yeah.
But there was,
yeah.
I mean.
But it wasn't as big of a thing. Yeah. You know, I think it's a few things. You know, my mom was during her life like a great comfort to a lot of people, you know, not just me, but my friends, other family members, you know, cousins, etc. And I wanted that comfort and like being in a place where you've lost the thing that you wanted the most, that you really believed was going to work out. And then also having to recognize that like you can't even comfort yourself in the ways that you want to because of, you know, both the pandemic and my mom being gone. Like it was just so miserable. And in that moment, I realized like, I don't think we ever get over these things that happen to us that are transformational, these big, big losses in life, you know, parents, best friends, siblings, children, etc. And I don't think we're supposed to. I think instead what we have to figure out is what it looks like to live without your person. And like, how do you do that in a way that feels comfortable, that makes you happy, that allows you to still have some connection to that person? Like, that's what I became obsessed with because, you know, I couldn't get my mom back, obviously. But were there other ways of living and of being that would get me as close as possible? Like that was just like a question that plagued me because I was in so much pain. Like I was so miserable, sick, unhappy, anxious. Like it was just such an awful period. And all I wanted was this woman who at that point had been dead for 11 years.
How has that yearning softened as you've really moved through the grief? Or has it softened?
Yeah, I would say it has, primarily because I try to do my best to do the things that I recommend in Grief is Love. Like I give myself permission to grieve, no matter that it's been now 15 years and I have the baby that, I was working so hard for back then, like even though I have those, like I still get hit with it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just decided to be okay with that. Like I don't feel like I owe anyone else an explanation for how I feel, for being sad around Mother's Day last year, for instance, when it was my first Mother's Day as a mom. And I was super grateful for that, obviously, but I also can still miss my own mom, and that's okay. So I spend a lot of time like really making sure that I'm being intentional about how I approach and treat myself when I'm grieving or struggling. I also got better over time at, and I mentioned this, excuse me, in the book as well, like asking myself when I'm feeling like I miss my mom, like, what is it that I'm looking for? Am I looking for comfort?
Great question.
Am I looking for, because when you can answer that question, it helps you better identify other ways to support yourself in the absence of that person you love. So like if it's comfort, can I like talk to my husband instead, or a best friend? If it's encouragement, I have an amazing friend and mentor, writer and speaker. Her name is Reshma Sajani, and she is like the ultimate cheerleader. Like everything that I think I am deserving of professionally, she has plans that are like 10 times as big. So, maybe I'll text her instead. If it's, I just actually feel exhausted and I wish that I had my mom to whine and complain to and make me feel better about how tired I am from life as an adult, I'll take a nap. Like, so trying really hard to be intentional about like, what is it that you're actually seeking? And how can you do that for yourself, assuming, the person that you love is no longer here to do those things for you.
Well, and what I loved about the book was that each chapter is like a different gift you should be giving to yourself in terms of when you're grieving, right? So you talk about permission, surrender, feel, ask, which I want to circle back to because I think it's important, grace, intimacy, care, legacy, and love. Yep. So let's circle back to ask, because I think that this is something oftentimes when someone's grieving, as the non-griever, people will likely say, what can I do for you? Or, what do you tell me? Just tell me what you need. Right. And I've heard many times that there's this like push pull between, well, I shouldn't have to tell you.
Yes.
Just do something. But then also, where do we, when we need something, ask for it? Yeah,
it is a push pull. So a few things in pretty much every, interview I've done on grief, I always get the question like, what do I do when this happens to someone I care about? What do I say? I feel like I'm going to say the wrong thing and I don't want to offend somebody, et cetera, et cetera. My response is always like, what you do is more important than what you say. So focus on taking some sort of action. Like if someone's parent just died, if someone just had like a horrible pregnancy loss, whatever it is, do something for them that is either rooted in active, practical support, like a meal or walking their dog or watching their kid, or something that is rooted in your relationship with the person. So like not every grief gift has to be flowers or a copy of Grief is Love, for instance. One of my best friends.
But that would make a great grief gift.
Yes, it does make a great grief gift. But one of my best friends, when I lost pregnancy in 2019, she sent me a care package from a gourmet cheese store in New York City that she knew that I loved. And so instead of focusing on the horrible thing that had just happened, it was like, I know people are going to be stopping by to see you. I know that you like snacks. I know that you love this store. And so I'm going to send you something that like reminds you of who you are outside of this current experience. Now, on the flip side, though, when it comes to asking for help, if we view grief the way that myself and the researchers who supported my book view it as like a lifelong process of learning to live in the midst of, significant loss, then you're going to need people to support you and help you and show up for you multiple times over the course of your life as you move in and out of grief, right? And so I think some of that help oftentimes needs to be paid professional help, like therapy, counseling, that kind of thing. I also think we all need to get more comfortable at asking like friends and family to help us and support us as we're going through something hard. I have struggled with this. I think a lot of people struggle with this for two reasons. One, the one you mentioned, which is, I just want you to know what to do. And that's fine, especially early on. Just show up. Don't ask people how you can help them. Just take that action. But when it comes to the ongoing support, grievers need to feel like it is okay and acceptable and normal to ask for friends to, maybe meet them for lunch on their mom's birthday, or help them figure out their holiday plans if Christmas was dad's big holiday, or ask someone to help you a little bit as you're trying to find a therapist to help counsel you through this difficult time. I think when I struggle to ask for help, what I try to do is kind of flip it around in my brain. Like, how do I feel when I'm able to really help someone who I love during a difficult time? Like, I feel good. Like, I feel useful. I feel like I made a contribution. Like, there's nothing wrong with asking for help from someone else, because you may be giving them something that they need too. And I think that healing happens largely in community. And so being prepared to ask for and to ask for help, and also to like support people when they're grieving, is just critically important.
Well, and I think what you said, like, also think of things that, aren't fitting of the situation, perhaps, right?
Like, it's a death thing. Someone, and I wasn't even honestly that super close friends with this person, but someone sent me a pair of pink Prada shoes when my mom died. And it was like, obviously the most random thing, but my mother loved pink. I love pink. I had the breast cancer charity, et cetera. It was like so gorgeous and so special. So yeah, I think do something that feels lovely and comforting, but is also just, like I said, rooted in who this person is outside of this horrible thing that has happened to them.
Well, and how seen you must have felt in that.
Exactly.
With that gift,
exactly.
Right? Like, exactly. Wow, this person knew my mom. They knew me. They knew my love of, like, this shared love of this. And it doesn't always have to be a pair of Prada shoes, but
no, Lord Jesus.
But it is such a special thing. And I'm sure you'll always look at those and remember the kindness that went into and the thoughtfulness that went into that.
Exactly. Another friend, and I'll stop after this, but I've gotten very fortunate with super supportive friends. Another friend, a couple months after, our pregnancy loss, she knew that Christmas was going to be hard for me that year. And usually I am an over the top Christmas person. And so she sent me these like sparkly, like black Santa Claus earrings that she thought I would love, so it's like, just be fun in your support. Like, it doesn't just have to be heavy and sad all the time. Like, maybe you can send someone something that makes them smile when they haven't in a while.
What is it like as a Black woman in America grieving? Because this seemed multi-layered in a way that likely grief for me is not. And you brought up a lot of things I hadn't even thought about. And how do you feel like that impacted your grieving process?
Yeah. And so one thing that's really important for me to be clear about, like, I think that grief
especially in the beginning, is miserable and hard and heavy and challenging and over. It makes everything that is hard in life harder. Whether we're talking about mental health or the Black maternal health crisis and, the likelihood of the increased risk of dying in childbirth or your child not making it through, et cetera, that we've seen reported with Black women, or something like grief. And the reason is the people who are called to grieve the most, which in this country you could point to any sort of more marginalized community. So not just Black, but Black, poor, LGBTQ, et cetera. They also tend to be the people who are the most disconnected from the resources that can facilitate healing, like access to affordable mental health support, even access to affordable physical health support, and ease of making and getting doctor's appointments and things like that. Because we know that grief has a very real impact on not just our minds, but also our physical bodies. And people who grieve are more likely to get sick. Things like paid time off from work, paid childcare, et cetera. I also think that culturally, the narrative around Black women and grief is very grin and bear it, and Black women can handle anything. We are supposed to be strong. That is how everyone sees us. And I'm not even just talking about the ways in which white America tends to generalize and see Black women, but I'm also talking about within our own communities and culture. It's not just a Black versus white thing. It's also an internal Black thing. Excuse me. And so I think as a result of that, and as a result of the inherited grief and trauma that so many of us carry, it's always going to make a grief event a bit harder to deal with. And, even in my case, where relatively speaking, I'm incredibly privileged, yes, I'm a Black woman. Yes, I grew up in a household where there wasn't much money, but I went to Harvard. I worked on Wall Street. I worked for President Obama. I've had all of these very, very, very privileged and elite experiences. And yet, when my mom died, I did not feel comfortable conveying how much pain I was in, because I worried about how that would reflect on me in the workplace, how it would reflect on me in some of my interpersonal relationships, which were mostly with white people, not people of color. And I recognized at that time that even though I had achieved all of these different things at that point, I was still so early in my career and first generation, everything in my family. And so if I needed to really fall apart or take 6 months off from work or, do any of these things that people often need when they go through a traumatic loss, I couldn't afford to do any of that. And so instead, I just committed to keeping it together and not really fully or effectively processing the grief. And so my thing to people out there who feel like there isn't room for their grief in this society, you have to make room for it. You are worthy of whatever your grief requires. And I think for those of us who are more privileged, it's a question of, how are we using our privilege to ensure that everyone has access to the things that they need to heal in this country.
Mm. And what do you feel like some of those things are, especially with everything that's happened in the past 2 years, where it seems like the chasm is even greater in some ways? The awareness is maybe more present, but the chasm feels greater.
Yeah, no, I think the chasm feels greater because people are more aware. And then obviously, as I'm sure you know, so many of these issues and challenges have been exacerbated by the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think if you are in a position of power and privilege, doing what you can inside your own businesses, inside your company, to ensure that policies are in place that create room for everyone to grieve, no matter, sort of what their status level is within the organization. I also think it should be a policy issue for more of us. Mm-hmm. The fact that there's no guaranteed bereavement leave in this country. And, a lot of companies only give people 2 to 3 days. before
Well,
they
I mean, when
are
they're only
told to
giving
report.
people like 6 weeks for maternity leave.
Yeah.
It's right. It's
Yeah.
so
It's
backwards.
disgusting. It's
Right.
disgusting. And so I think all of us advocating, not just for ourselves, but for each other is a big part of it. Unfortunately, because of the way capitalism works, there isn't much value placed on grief, on healing, or on care in general. Like you said, 6 weeks of maternity leave, like that's insane. I mean, we adopted our child, and it was a very sudden adoption. So I worked a bit throughout the entire thing, but there was no way I could have been in an office from 8 to 6 or whatever, 6 weeks after he showed up. And I didn't even give birth. So I cannot imagine, given what women's bodies go through to create life and bring it into the world, being back at work in 6 weeks. That's completely ridiculous.
Well, and I wanted to revisit what you were talking about earlier, because I wanted to say this before, but I think what's so useful about what you offer here is we're talking about grief in the face of death, but I think grief shows up in so many different ways in people's lives, and any of these, they were chapters in the book, but any of these, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my God, this keeps happening to me.
Themes?
Themes. Thank you. Is that what you said? Themes?
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of like how to treat yourself, can really apply not just for death, but for so many challenges we face in our lives.
Yes.
And they don't
100%.
require money. They don't require access.
They mostly
do require
time. Yeah. Time and like a commitment to doing them. And I'll say, in the book, I define grief as the repeated experience of learning to live in the midst of a significant loss. And I did not use the word death in that definition, because I think we grieve whenever there is a future that we believe that we can believe in, like we have a certain degree of certainty around the future, whether it's with regard to our children or our marriage or our health or our careers. Whenever that is taken away, I think we are called to grieve. So, that's serious illness, that's divorce, that's, maybe you're dealing with some health challenges with a child that you didn't expect. Like, I think all of those moments are grief moments. It's not just about death. And I hope that, and I think I've kept the book and the research in the book general enough so that if you're dealing with one of those other forms of loss, you can still get something out of Grief is Love.
So I want to pull 2 quotes that I found in the book. And I also want to talk, well, let me start with this. I wanted to talk about your friendship with your roommate from college. Because this was such a poignant story and resonated with me. I think because, well, let's tell the story and then we can talk a little about it.
So, roommate from college, who I will add is still one of my best friends to this day. She and I were close from the time we were 18. Like, families got along really well. So we even did some holidays together with parents and grandparents, things like that. She was one of my best friends in the whole world. And when my mom died, she didn't come to her funeral because she had a soccer game. And to give context, my roommate Alicia was playing on the Irish women's national team. This was not like a pickup game, at the local park or something.
Right.
Like, this was technically her job at the time. And I remember they had a game in Portugal is what it was. And I was blind with rage. And I basically said, if you can't prioritize me right now, then like, I'm not friends with you anymore, essentially, which I will also add, we are 2 of 12 roommates that all lived together during college. And so, me saying like, I cut you off, I'm not your friend anymore, also made things awkward for pretty much everybody. Alicia insisted on finding her way back in. And she ultimately explained to me that her feeling was, I was going to be so supported at the funeral. Like of those 12 roommates, I think all but 2 others weren't there. Everybody else was there. My entire banking department shut down. Friends from high school, friends from college. Like I was surrounded by like an overwhelming amount of love and support, even though we were all in our early 20s and had no idea what we were doing. So it was mostly eating cookies and drinking wine, which was exactly what I needed. And she felt like when she needed to show up was after everybody else went away. You know, she's like, I know that at some point the support is going to dwindle down. And like, that's when she believed it would be more important for her to be present for me. And of course, like years later, I came to see her logic. But in the meantime, I made things very hard for her. She apologized multiple times. I mean, she sent her boyfriend to apologize and bring gifts and stuff on her behalf. She sent her parents to my mother's funeral and wake. But ultimately, it was her forcing her way back into my life by jumping on a train with me when I was headed to my dad's house to help clean out my mom's stuff one weekend. And there is something, and Brian Stevenson, big civil rights advocate, says that it is really hard to hate people when you are proximate to them. Like hatred dies in proximity. And something about actually being together that broke me down, and her apologies and her commitment. And we remain close to this day. And now I see that I wasn't really blind with rage. I was blind with grief. And I recognized in her like ongoing love and support and apologies that grief requires grace. You know, other people are going to make mistakes when they are trying to support you. You are going to make mistakes when you think that you're further along with your grief and maybe can take on more than you actually can. And then you end up flaking on someone at the last minute because you're still having a hard time. Or you are going to need to extend grace to yourself when you're still moving through certain elements of this grief and you just want it to be over. And so for me, that chapter on grace was just like such an important chapter in the book.
Well, and I think that oftentimes there seems to be so much that comes up around when someone dies in terms of like how the supporter responds. You know, this is like what we were talking about earlier. And I think questions of like, where do I put myself? Where do I belong? How much should I be involved? How little should I be involved? I mean, this seems a little bit clear cut, but her point makes sense, you know, and so did yours. Like, I understand how you wanted her there, but how her showing up for the long run was probably way more than 95% or 99% of everybody else there. And so how can we maybe reframe some of these situations that even at the time are so hurtful, but if someone can be there for us and really show up, then maybe that's really the true expression of their love for us.
Now looking back, I see it all so clearly, and she really didn't do anything wrong. It was just where I was in my grief at the time. I wanted what I wanted and nothing else mattered. And I'm able to see that now, you know, and it's okay. I want to tell people who are listening, who are dealing with grief, like, it's okay to have those moments. Like, it's okay to handle this situation imperfectly because it's an imperfect, horrible set of circumstances. So I always want to encourage people, just do the best you can and be honest about what you need and expect from people to the extent that you're able to, because I do think that makes a big difference. Because I don't even know if I ever said to her, like, this is where I really want you to show up for me, you know?
So a few of the quotes I pulled out. So this was one from your mom, I believe. She said to you, answer the phone for your friends.
Yeah.
And you said, I never answer the phone. Everyone close to me knows that. But what I interpreted her words to mean was show your people you love them by showing up for them.
Yes, that is exactly how I feel. Like, I'm a horrible phone answerer, but like, all my people know if you need something, you just have to tell me, and like, I'll take care of it. Like, I'll do anything for you. But I'm bad at answering the phone, so you should probably text.
Well, and it's such like a poignant, especially, I don't know why there was something about answering the phone that struck me, maybe because of the fact that we don't pick up the phone.
Old school too, right?
It's old school. I love a throwback. That we don't like spend enough time picking up the phone, talking to each other, having those more I want to say more genuine connections, but a little bit deeper of a connection to someone. And I really appreciate that sentiment. And then you also said, if I never let you inconvenience me, then we aren't really friends. We are just people who hang out and drink together. This was a friend of yours as well who said this.
Yes. It was one of those things, you have your perception of like what friendship is and what it should look like from childhood. And it is mostly just about spending time with people when you're a kid. And at this point, I was a freshman in college. And so this was, a relatively new friend. And one of our mutual friends had a friend who was really struggling at school about 2 hours away. And she wanted to go visit this friend, and I offered to go with her, but we didn't have a way to get there. And he offered to drive us and bring us back. And we're like, you're just going to like drive us for 2 hours to see someone who you don't even know, wait for us, and then you're going to drive us back here? Like, we were like, why would you do that? Like, it just seems like not a very fun thing for you to do. And when he said that, if I never let you inconvenience me, then like, what are we besides people who just, hang out and like have drinks together? I was like, oh, wow. Like, it was one of those like just lines that stuck with me. It's been over 20 years now since he said that. And it's always for me been the marker of true friendship. Like, yes, you coming to my birthday party or coming to my house for dinner some night or whatever. Like, yes, those things matter and I enjoy those things. But fundamentally, I think true friendship is a level beyond that, where I want you to feel comfortable asking me for like a proper favor and vice versa. Like, that's how I want us to be in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is how oftentimes we are with our family.
Yes.
But we don't do it with our friends.
Yeah.
I was, when I read it, I was like, how many people in my life have allowed me to be inconvenienced by them? Like, it really made me think like,
yeah, our culture is all about like, I've got this, that like independent American spirit. But fundamentally, I don't actually think we do anything that really matters in life by ourselves. So whether it's family or friends or help that you hire, like, I just don't think we do. And so I think it's really good for all of us to be prepared to both inconvenience someone else and to be inconvenienced by someone else who we love.
How do you see joy in the face of grief?
So it was really important to me to have a chapter on joy. My mom was a really joyful person. I mean, she literally died laughing. And I love joy. I love fun. I like to laugh. I like to have a good time. I'm sort of known for some of those things. But when it comes to joy and grief, I think there's a couple things that are really important to consider. So first of all, just because you are having a moment of joy and like having a laugh, having a good time with your friends, like, I never want grievers to feel like when they have those moments, that means that they're like doing grief wrong, or like to feel bad or guilty about having moments of joy. I think we're still here and we should have moments of joy and laughter and fun and levity. I also think that joy is something that can't be forced or faked. Mm-hmm. And so, people pushing you to turn your lemons into lemonade, or, telling you that you should be happy because they're in a better place, or, any of those platitudes. I don't think any of that works. I think that in order for joy to like be real and have a positive impact on you, it needs to be authentic. And I think we get at authentic joy by being honest about our pain. And sometimes you just have to, honestly, sometimes you just have to like sit in shit for a while and like really be present and real about what you're experiencing in order to have space to open yourself up to joy. And so I want to encourage people to not force it, but also to be honest enough about your experience of grief that there is room for joy to enter into the equation.
And let's end with, well, we're not going to end just yet because I do have a question for you after this, but the title of your book is Grief is Love. And you say love doesn't die, and that is why we grieve. You don't get over love. Loving someone and being loved in return leaves an indelible imprint on your brain. It cannot be erased because love can't be taken away, can't be taken back, even if our person is no longer with us in this world. Death forces us to continually recalibrate our expectations around love.
Yes.
That's
It's so
it.
funny. It's so funny. There are times when people read lines, and I'm like, oh, I remember where I was when I wrote that. Like, I remember like waking up and being like, oh, okay, I have something. And so much of the end of the book, which includes that piece on love, is connected to the very sudden arrival of our son. You know, I felt like when we adopted Bennett, you know, all of a sudden I had this completely new understanding for life, for love, like just how much my mother loved me. I had this new identity as a mother. And suddenly I just felt like I had a better understanding for all of this grief stuff, honestly. And I woke up one day and I realized like, oh, this is why we don't get over it. Like that love, it imprints on us.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I had to go to the researcher that I was working with and say, like, is this true or is this just the way that I feel? And thankfully, she said, actually, it is true. You know, here's the research and data to back it up. It's not just a Marisa thing. And that was basically how we ended the book, with this theory that's known as the continuing bonds theory, which is one of the leading theories in the space around grief and loss and healing. And it states that, you know, the healthiest way for those of us who've experienced a significant loss to live with that loss is by finding our own way to continue our relationship with the deceased. You know, that love doesn't leave. And so, like, what do you do with all of these feelings? And then I also had to reconcile this idea that, okay, if grief is love, then why is it also so painful? It's so painful because love is both action and feeling. Like, I can still feel the love that I have for my mother and the love that my mother has for me, but she's not here to act on it. And that is really sad. You know, I had 25 years of this woman very actively and proactively loving me in a million different ways all of the time. And all of that is now gone. And that hurts. And so that's how I have come to think of grief in a way that I hope is comforting for others, and also just provides a framework for like why we feel the way we feel when we lose someone who we love.
Have you had any signs or synchronicities since your mom's death?
Yes. So you have read Grief is Love. I don't know if you have seen the cover, and I can't read your copy right now, but when there were discussions around the design of the cover for the book, I gave my editor, like, you know, I like bright, I like pink, you know, I want it to feel very warm and alive and not a depressing book about grief. And the cover that they came back with, it's the most perfect thing for my mom ever. Like, in addition to it capturing my personality, it also has her favorite flowers, which I'd never shared with anyone on the team. But lilies were her thing. And for the first like 10 years after she died, I hated flowers. I didn't want to be anywhere near flowers, especially if they happened to be lilies. And that's what ended up on the cover of the book. Pure coincidence or what, you know, whatever you want to call it. But when I saw this book cover, I was like, wow, that is, we say like that's some mom shit. Like, she like definitely got involved there.
Wow. And what a perfect place for it. I mean,
I know.
Right? Like, if she was going to show up, she showed up where she should.
Yep.
Supporting you
So,
and loving you still.
Yeah.
Well, Marisa, thank you so much for this super insightful conversation. I know it's going to help so many. Where can people find your work if they're interested?
You can find me. I'm Marisa Renee Lee on all social channels. And you can also head to my website, marisareneelee.com, and sign up for my infrequent but always useful newsletter.
You sound like me.
I'm like, I'm just going to be honest about it. It's
Right.
not a monthly thing. It's when there's time and there's something useful to share thing.
Right. I try Mondays. Sometimes it's Tuesdays.
No.
But you get it eventually. You get it eventually.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
thank you. Thank you so, so much for this today and for our chat before. It was super fun. And I'm excited to share this with the world. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.